Bibiane Slade operates the nuclear reactor that produces the radioisotopes Sheila Boutcher uses diagnostically in her job as a nuclear medicine technologist, two important facets of nuclear science. Sheila Boutcher is a nuclear medicine technologist with the Misericordia Hospital in Winnipeg. Her job is to make images or pictures of the internal workings of the patient's body.
Nuclear medicine is a diagnostic technique similar to X-ray in that it's trying to find out what is wrong with a person. It's not an actual treatment. What we do is that we inject some slightly radioactive material into a patient, into their bloodstream. This is carried by the bloodstream to a particular organ in the body depending on what we inject. And we can then put a camera above the patient. The particular organ is slightly radioactive, and we can get a picture of that organ or series of organs in the patient.
Before the techniques of nuclear medicine were developed, doctors had to do a lot more exploratory surgery. But surgery always carries an element of risk to the patient. Nuclear medicine is a reliable, painless alternative to investigative surgery. It helps doctors diagnose disease early, making treatment more effective. Nuclear medicine can detect cancer in the bone, for example, months before it can be detected by X-ray. Today, Sheila is preparing to carry out a complete bone scan of a patient's body.
There are a number of different reasons why we might be asked to do bone scans. Probably the most common reason is that a patient has a known cancer and they're looking for spread of that cancer to the bone. However, bones can also get infected, and that's known as osteomyelitis. If a doctor suspects the patient's bone may be infected, they will very often ask for a bone scan. Or sometimes a fracture will not show on an X-ray and may show up on our scans. So there are a variety of different reasons.
Sheila must first prepare the radioactive material she will use for the injections. She calculates how much radioactivity she needs for this particular bone scan, and then prepares her solutions accordingly. Different types of radioactive materials are required for different organs. Each type of material is kept in a separate color-coded pot, ensuring that Sheila gets the correct material. The pots are made of lead to protect Sheila from the radioactivity. The safe use of radioactive materials is a primary consideration of nuclear medicine personnel.
Well, with any radioactive material, there is, of course, an element of danger. And a large part of our training as nuclear medicine technologists is learning how to handle the material safely. While we're handling the material in syringes, the syringes are inside lead glass shields, which cuts down about 95% of the radiation while it's on the material. We wear rubber gloves all the time when we're handling it. That means that if you do get a little bit on your glove, it's not actually on your skin. You can discard it right away. We do have monitors where we check our hands, check our lab coats before we leave the lab to make sure that we do not have any radiation on us. So that as long as you take the correct precautions, as we are trained to do, there really is no real danger in this job whatsoever.
Once Sheila has drawn up the material, she puts it into a machine that measures the amount of radioactivity in the material. She always writes down the actual amount of radiation in a dose next to the patient's name as a record of how much radiation each patient receives. When the patient comes in, Sheila is always careful to reassure him and to explain the whole test. She asks his name and whether he has ever had a bone scan before. She explains that she is going to give him an injection and that there will be no side effects. The radioactive material is going to circulate through the blood and be picked up by the bones, the same way they pick up calcium in the blood that comes from the milk we drink. 2 hours after the injection, the patient's entire skeleton is slightly radioactive, emitting particles called gamma rays. He's now ready to go under the camera that will make a picture of his radioactive bones.
Well, unlike any field that I've been in before, the work that I'm doing now does deal with people, and I find that rewarding. The fact that we are helping to find out what is wrong with people, and that hopefully the work that we're doing will help in curing or helping their illness, at least to some degree.
Because this camera records gamma particles, it's called a gamma camera. It slowly passes over the patient's body, recording each gamma particle as a flash of light. These thousands of flashes are sent to a computer that combines them to produce an image of the patient's entire skeleton. But if radioactivity is dangerous, won't the patient be harmed by it?
Again, there is a potential for a small degree of damage from any radiation in the body. The amount of radiation in our scans is probably comparable to that in many X-rays. And if you do have to have a large number of procedures, you are getting a cumulative dose. But the doctors do feel that the information that they gain from this is worth the small possible risk to the patient.
The entire bone scan takes only about 10 minutes to complete. Within a few hours, the material in his bones will cease to be radioactive. The risk of having radiation in his body is outweighed by the value of an early diagnosis of possible disease. Once the patient leaves, Sheila sits down at the computer terminal and processes the image recorded by the gamma camera. After enhancing it, she makes a picture on a large piece of film that can be delivered to the doctor. The doctor will then interpret the image as part of his diagnosis of the patient's illness. Sheila must examine the final picture carefully to make sure it's of good quality.
In a normal bone scan, the bone throughout the body will pick up radioactive material more or less evenly. If there is a cancer in the bone, that particular area of bone is growing more rapidly than normal bone, and it will pick up additional radioactive material, so that particular spot will look dark on our scan.
Sheila doesn't interpret the images herself. She prepares them and sends them to a physician who determines if there's any sign of disease. Nuclear medicine requires caring, highly skilled people. After many years of staying home to look after her family, Sheila decided to go back to school and start a new career.
Well, I wanted to do something scientific. At the particular age that I was at, I didn't want to spend longer than 2 years training, and I wanted a job that would be secure, and the health field seemed to fill that bill. And I went up to the local community college and asked what they had in the health field that was scientific. One of the subjects they mentioned was nuclear medicine technology, and the idea interested me. I don't think I found it difficult. I found it interesting because the rest of the class were much closer to my children's age than my own. And rather than being looked at as someone's mother, I found it interesting to be one of the gang, and I must say they accepted me very much as one of the gang. I'm still very friendly with some of the girls I trained with. And I just found that there was complete acceptance of me. Nobody seemed to worry about the fact that I was a generation older than they were. And I didn't have a problem.
Family times are an important counterbalance to the precise nature of Sheila's career.
Well, in the summer, my family's main hobby is sailing. We do spend every weekend on our sailboat, and also try to take a holiday on it most summers. In the winter, we do some cross-country skiing, not as much in Manitoba as we did down east because of the cold. And I am also quite involved in helping run some classes in boating safety, which keeps me fairly busy over the winter. I also enjoy reading a lot and music, that type of thing.
Sheila's advice for those considering a career is based on her own career experiences in geology, motherhood, and nuclear medicine technology.
I think one thing that's important for a young person as they go through high school is to keep their options open. Don't narrow down your field too early on. If you can manage to keep up the various subjects as you go on, then when you go to university, you will have your choice of which direction you may want to go. Or if you don't go to university in other directions, you still have the flexibility to move in different directions. In terms of having changed careers, there are moments when I feel that if I had not stayed home with my children and I had carried on working, my life would probably have gone further professionally than it did. But I don't think that I really, on the long run, ever regret the way that I did run my life. I think it worked out well for me, doing part-time work for a certain period of time. I have a lot of admiration for girls these days who can handle a full-time career and a young family. I think it must be extremely difficult for them. I have a lot of admiration for them. But for myself, I think it worked out well with the way that I did it.
Vivian Slade and Sheila Boutcher, two women challenging nuclear science.